welcome to the DEI Now online seminar series. We've been running for a couple of months now and doing very well in terms of people across the globe, I should say, joining us for our weekly Wednesday talks. For today, we have, well, a great friend of mine and not long ago, a colleague of all of ours in the Energy Institute, Charlotte Adams. Charlotte's background is a PhD in geosciences at Newcastle, following a first degree up in St Andrews on geosciences. And that research in Newcastle was basically around remediating metal mines and looking at the geochemistry of waters coming out of those mines. And that's provided a great foundation for the work that she's done in the university over the last few years. And that's been to re-examine those mines, in this instance, principally flooded coal mines, not as a source of solutes, but rather instead as a source of heat. And rather than steal her thunder, I will kick her off in a moment or two. What you have in front of you on this Zoom function is, Zoom program, is the chat function. And rather than interrupting Charlotte with questions, please note them down within the chat function. And then at the end of Charlotte's talk, we'll come back to that. I just checked with my administrator, Lynn. Are there any other notices I should be saying and haven't done so?
No, that's it.
Oh, okay. So a wonderful welcome to Charlotte Adams and Stone Cold, Innovation Repurposing of Abandoned Mines. Off you go, Charlotte. Thank you. And I think you're muted, Charlotte.
Oh, am I?
Yeah. Charlotte, we don't seem to be picking up. Can you do a quick sound test?
Can you hear that a bit better?
Try again. Hello? We're only picking up intermittently. Lynn, are you picking up sound?
Nothing at the moment.
It might just be worth logging off and on again. Sometimes that helps.
I can do that. Do you want me to
Okay.
come back?
Yes, please do.
Okay, see you in a minute.
Yeah. So whilst we're losing Charlotte, let me tell you about what's coming up next on the DI seminar sequence. We have nuclear energy next week with Duncan Connors, currently a fellow of DI, and we look forward to that. I might to play some music or something now. We'll give Charlotte a moment or two and see if she can log back in again.
It's just coming back in now.
Okay, it was working when we tested it just before the broadcast occurred.
Can you hear me okay now?
Where's she gone?
I can hear you. I can see you.
Thank you. Well, can you see my screen as well?
No, we've gone back to John.
All right, that's probably because I'm speaking. Okay, I can see your screen, Charlotte. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, is that okay?
Okay,
Perfect.
off you go.
Great. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. Okay, so thank you, John, for the introduction, and thanks to DEI for the invitation, and to everybody for signing up to listen today. So as John mentioned, I was at Durham University for about 11 years. and I still remain an advisor to the Durham Energy Institute, so I'm really enjoying still being involved with the university. I joined the Coal Authority in February, and as John mentioned, I've been working on abandoned mines and some of the issues associated with dealing with them for around about 20 years now. Now I can't advance my slides. Oh, that's it, it's just a bit slow. Right, okay. So we are, when I was telling people that I was leaving to join the Coal Authority, a few people had never heard of us. So we are a non-departmental government body created by the 1994 Coal Act, and our sponsoring department is BEIS. The Coal Authority own and manage the UK mining infrastructure, and that includes around about 23,000 abandoned deep coal mines across the UK coal fields. So the coal fields underlie around about a quarter of our homes and businesses, and 9 out of 10 of our largest urban areas on their size are also underlain by coal workings. And this is not surprising because many of these towns and cities were established because of the strength of the coal resources beneath them. So the things that we do, we have a £2.4 billion liability of coal legacies. So this includes things like ground stability. So any mine workings collapse, we deal with those. And we also pump and treat water and deal with water emergence, which I'll talk about shortly. And through the work that we do on protecting watercourses, we have cleaned over 400 kilometres or protected them from bridges, discharges from mine water, and we've also protected a significant quantity of water supply aquifers which overlie some of the mined areas. So there's an abandoned plan archive which dates from the Coal Mines Regulation Act, which came into force in 1872. So that was a statutory requirement to deposit all of the plans with the Secretary of State upon abandonment. And the picture behind me is actually a picture of our archive, as is the one on there. Somebody actually asked me the other day whether I was in a fabric shop, which it kind of does look a bit like that because a lot of these very old plans were drawn on linen. So we've got all those stored down in our head office, which is in Mansfield. And in some places, there's quite a lot of mining. Given the amount of time that mining has been going on in the UK, there was mining taking place before 1872. So in some places we may have what we call unrecorded workings. So if we have records of seams that were worked round about that 1872 time, we can probably infer that there may be some unrecorded workings in the same seams nearby. So we're always mindful of what might be there in these areas as well. In some areas, such as in Northumberland, when I've been looking through our database to get mine plans, some mines are still within private ownership, so they may be owned by a large landowner or estate at the time. So we may not have the plans for all of those, but a lot of stuff we have. The public can come and use our archive, browse our databases by appointment if you ever need any information. So the coal industry spanned around about 300 years or so of intensive mining, and this ended in December 2015 when Kellingley Colliery in North Yorkshire shut. So that colliery was around about 4 miles away from Ferrybridge, and it was supplying a lot of the coal that was burnt there. That site stopped burning coal in 2016. And you can see from the graph here, over that 300-year period, we estimate there's around about 17 billion tonnes have been taken out of the mines. And the coal output over this time has been shaped by various political events such as wars and strikes, technology changes, moving from steam engines to maybe diesel and electric trains, and also alternative fuels, so the dash for gas and cheaper imports of coal from elsewhere. So what happens when we abandon mines? So mines are pumped whilst they're worked so that the miners can safely access the coal. Once the mine is closed, the pumps are turned off, and over a period of maybe several decades or so, water levels recover, i.e. they return to a level pre-mining there or thereabouts. But the act of mining has created new pathways through which mine water can emerge at surface or threaten water-bearing formations that lie above them. So that's where we come in. By monitoring these sites, we're able to see what's happening. So in some areas, for example, Northumberland, the water levels are what we would call recovered. So that means they have now reached a static level and they're controlled by pumping there to keep them at the same level. Some areas are still recovering. So for example, some areas in South Wales are still rising, and areas where we have water that is still rising means that in future we may need to have more mine water treatment schemes. So we have around about 75 of those across the UK at the moment, but we may need to add more to those. So we treat the water where we need to. When it's of good quality, it may be discharged as it is. If it isn't, we treat it. The water may flow out under gravity, or at some sites we pump so that we control where it comes out and have the space to treat it if we need to. And we also have PV panels at some of our pumping stations to offset some of our electricity use at those sites. So talking about repurposing a legacy, this talk will feature more on the mine energy side of things, but there's also other things we're doing. So in effect, we treat water, so we treat 120 million cubic meters per annum. So that's the kind of equivalent to the demand, daily demand of round about 2 million people or so. It's actually a bit over 2 million people. Some of this water is fresh and some is brackish. The remainder is hypersaline, so that's more saline than seawater. We're also thinking about whether we can use the mines to capture floodwaters and store them underground, and also for water resilience, because last year the Environment Agency predicted that England could run out of water within 25 years. So we're looking at other uses for the water that we pump out. We also, in our mine water treatment schemes, the things we're dealing with there, the biggest challenge for us in the mine water, if it needs treating, is generally removing iron. So that's in the picture at the bottom. Those orange lagoons show where we're getting iron out of solution. This comes from within the coal originally, so it's often associated with pyrite that sometimes you find in coal seams. And as the water rises up through the mine after abandonment, it can flush iron out of the mine, which is fine until it makes contact with air and then it turns orange. So a lot of the treatment systems we are running rely on getting as much air into the water as possible to get the ochre to settle out. And when it does, we're left with a kind of ochreous sludge in our lagoons. So we're looking also at uses for that. So it can be used for water treatment. It's really good at absorbing things. So particularly things like phosphorus, the environmental regulations are clamping down on the amount of phosphorus that can be discharged, for example, from water treatment sites. So it can be used to help reduce phosphorus levels. It's used as pigments in building materials and also as a soil improver, again, because of its absorptive qualities. So that's some of the other things we're doing in the innovation team. The rest of the talk will focus mainly on mine energy. So the biggest thing here really with the mine geothermal is that it's different to typical ground source heat, which is sourced from solar energy, which is found within the first few tens of meters of the Earth's surface. So the mine energy comes from a deeper geothermal source generated at the Earth's core. And the temperatures we find in our mine workings go from maybe 14 degrees or so down to between 30 and 40 in our deepest mines. So our deepest mine is around about 1.4 kilometers deep. And if we were in Durham today, then I normally like to show a map from where we are, but this is the Durham area. So this is from our GIS system, and it shows the red crosses show where there's shafts, and the pink areas show where there's workings. And there's kind of lots of different polygons overlapping there, which just shows you where there's working taking place on lots of different seams. And what we find in Durham is, because the coal in the county as a whole is generally shallower to the west of the county and deeper to the east, so it dips out towards the sea and under the sea, we find the age of mines gets older as you get further towards the coast, which makes sense as technology developed and people were able to mine deeper. So there's two different types of workings that we pick up on our mine plans. The earliest form is pillar and stoop, which is at the top there, and or sometimes called room and pillar, and that involves leaving pillars of unworked coal in place and then removing kind of rooms of coal all around it. The idea being that the pillars that you leave will hold the roof up whilst you're extracting the rest. And then more recently, longwall mining methods were used. So that is total extraction of the coal. So you basically drive out a roadway as far as you're going to go and you work backwards across the seam, taking the coal out as you retreat from the mine. And as you're doing so, all the material above you is settling down as you retreat from the mine. So this is kind of important for us to think about because it kind of relates to the type of targets that we're going for underground when we're developing mine energy systems. So the roadways, for example, that you would find in a longwall system look similar to that tunnel picture at the bottom right there. So they're quite well engineered structures. They generally stand open after abandonment. So often we try and target those because you can see from the size of them, they're full of water. You're going to get really good flows out of a structure like that. And then the other thing we do is we put some kind of schematics together. We look at how all the shafts in the mines are connected, how the seams are connected, and then also between collieries there's often connections. So we tend to group collieries in what we refer to as blocks, and they generally behave in a hydrogeologically similar way, i.e. the water is responding in that block in a similar way. And we've been able to work out where these blocks are and a bit about how they're behaving from the 800 or so monitoring points that we have across the coalfield where we can get water level readings. And in looking at how they're filled up post abandonment, we can see when one colliery fills up and starts decanting into the next one. So we can get this information about the blocks, which is important because if you want to abstract water, you want to know which block you're going to be impacting upon. So these are some examples of the mine plans we have, and you can see the one on the right is clearly a lot older than the one on the left. So when you're looking for a particular site, it can be very variable, the quality of the plans. You need to be able to georeference them to make a decent drilling target. And you can see from the one on the right, trying to find a target there is going to be more complex because somebody's actually painted some of the areas in. Some of these plans are just really beautiful. Lovely things to look at, especially the old ones. And a lot of the colliery managers, I think, were artists because they used to quite often paint their own little scenes onto the maps and annotate them with their own kind of style. The one on the left is a more modern plan, and you can see from that it's much clearer to see what's going on. And the types of target we'd aim for would be, you can see the pink kind of crossed lines there. We'd aim for intersections in those lines so that you would get a good flow through them. The kind of pink dotty filled in area is where you've got ghosts, so that's where there's been longwall mining, and you would have a kind of broken up, more gravelly type deposit. So we have seen instances where people have thought, right, we know there's a seam there, we'll just drill to hit it, but it needs to be a bit more detailed than that. You actually need to target a specific feature within the seam to ensure that you've got the best chance of getting a good flow of water. And ideally for a mine energy project, you want to have more than one seam beneath your site so that you've got one to take water from and one to put water back to. So this reflects some work we've been doing with the British Geological Survey on temperatures across the UK coalfields, which will eventually be added to our later database that we have. And we have a publicly available browser called our Interactive Map Viewer, and you can have a look at what's underneath your area there. This temperature layer ultimately will go on there as well. But in putting this data together, and the idea of doing this was to see where the temperature is coming from and see if it's a sustainable source, i.e. are temperatures going to kind of hold steady over time, or are they likely to decline? And a lot of the temperature data, so the dots on this graph here, are dry rock temperatures that were collected underground in the 20s and 30s. And this was because at the time the government was interested in taking the mines much deeper. but there's a limit to the temperatures that the miners could actually work in. So a lot of these temperature measurements were taken for that purpose. So they were taken from the dry rock temperature within the mine. But what we found since is the kind of squiggly lines on there are where we've done temperature profiling in flooded shafts or boreholes. And we found that basically the temperatures that we observe in the kind of water profiles are very similar to what we had with the dry rock temperatures, which makes sense because the two have equilibrated against each other. But it tells us that the temperatures have been fairly constant between now and then and are driven mainly by the geothermal gradient. So just thinking about heat decarbonisation, obviously we're using a lot of our energy that we use is used to produce heat. The majority of that comes from fossil fuels. We have targets that have been set by 2050 to be net carbon zero. We have a lot of local authorities that have been declaring climate emergencies. And the government has been making some calculations and set some targets for heat networks that could supply heat. So by 2030, a target of 18% of all heat should go through a heat network, and 43% by 2050 if we're to meet this kind of carbon target effectively. At the moment, there's around about 2% of heat is supplied through heat networks. So there is a heat network delivery unit which is funding several feasibility projects for mine energy and other heat producing systems across the UK. So if you're interested, it's worth having a look at their information online about funding available for these types of studies. And the challenge really in decarbonising heat is when you think about the difference between the maximum heat demand in the winter and the low heat demand in the summer. So there's around about 4,000 gigawatt hours difference in terms of gas consumption. And that's about, in terms of the gigawatt hours there, that's about 8 times the amplitude we have between peak and low demand in the electricity system. So you're thinking, if we were to shift all of heat onto our electricity network, how would we do that? So if you're using heat pumps running at a coefficient of performance of 4, you could kind of quarter that. So that's what we're looking at really, is by using heat pumps. Yes, you're still using electricity to produce the heat, but it's done in a more efficient way. So in terms of deploying mine energy and how we do it, we've established and we kind of estimate that in the coal fields, there's enough heat sitting in the coal fields to heat all of the buildings that overlie it. We find that there's no interseasonal variation in the source temperature of mine water. So the coefficient of performance of your heat pump system that's running off it stays constant, which is unlike an air source heat pump system or a surface water heat pump. And normally in these systems, if we've got water at maybe between 10 and 20 degrees, say there, or we've got hotter temperatures in a deeper mine, we're generally basing on removing around about 5 degrees from the ambient temperature of the water. So in this example here, we've got a well drilled into a deeper level. The water would be pumped out, go through a heat exchanger, we'd take 5 degrees out of it, and then we'd return it to a shallower seam, so that you've got quite a good pathway between the two, so that you're not getting the cooler water back at your abstraction well too quickly. And we found that the distance between these on the surface, the two boreholes might actually be quite close together, but underground, the distance that it's travelling may be the order of several kilometres. One site, we've got a separation of 7 kilometres between two boreholes that are effectively very close together on the surface. So it's important to think about that. Unlike geothermal aquifer systems that use kind of open loop aquifers, we need less boreholes. So quite often they'll have maybe 6 doublets. For this, we'd maybe need 1 or 2 doublets, because the workings are so good at storing and transmitting water, and they're such big open structures that we can flow more water through them, so we can get away with having less boreholes. And in terms of sustainability, so this is an example from projected for our Seaham garden village development, which I'll talk about a bit later. But this just shows you some of the things that using a mine energy heat pump system can offer. So here we've got a low temperature network. It's offering stable pricing, which is future proof. So we're hoping to offer an energy price that is less than gas. As I mentioned before, the temperatures are stable year round, and we would expect for a mine energy system for the coefficient of performance of the heat pump to be 4 or greater. We have a small heat pump running at Durham, which would be linked to the Seaham scheme. That's the pumping station that we would use, and that currently runs at a COP of around 5. That heats the treatment plant and the offices that are there. And there's also an improvement in local air quality, because using heat pumps you're not burning gas, and also it removes the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning from people's homes. So they've got no combustion plant in their homes. They'd either have a heat interface unit or a heat pump within their homes. That I'll go into a bit more detail on that later on as well. Mine energy is really compatible with district heating. So there's some pictures there of some heat network pipes. So it can be, because it's running at lower temperatures, it can be done on plastic pipe. You don't have to transport fuels. So if you're comparing it maybe with a biomass fired heat network, there's no fuel transport involved. Because it runs at lower temperatures, with the mine water being a lower ambient temperature, it's got much better efficiencies, because you've got lower losses in your pipe network, because you're running everything at a much lower temperature. And if the ban on gas goes ahead, then it does offer an alternative that can be used at scale to produce heat in former mining areas if gas is no longer an option. Some of the opportunities we've been looking at, so how it would integrate with heat networks and various different ways we've been thinking about it, is the Seaham project, which I'll talk about later. That will work on a circulation temperature of 60 degrees with an energy centre, and the connected buildings will have heat interface units to take the heat. We can run that on non-metal pipework, so that brings down the cost of installing the heat network and just makes it a bit easier to do as well. People are not having to try and weld metal pipes in confined spaces underground. And also the boreholes in this instance, or the source of the mine water. So for the Seaham one, we're using water that we already pump, but if you were to put boreholes in, you'd need to have them near the energy centre where the heat pump would be. But we're also exploring decentralised models, which kind of link with this new idea of ambient loop systems, or 5G networks are sometimes called. So there you're circulating a loop of water at ambient temperature, so ambient mine water temperature, and the heat pumps are in the connected buildings, so they're at the point of use, or maybe there's clusters of buildings that are sharing one. It offers some flexibility, because you can grow out the system as demand increases. Because it's low temperature, again, you can use non-metal pipework. And the other thing here is that you can put the boreholes more or less anywhere on your heat network, so they can tap into it at any point, which for us is really good, because we're very much dictated by what targets are available in the subsurface. So just thinking about the potential and looking at a bigger system, we can integrate various different energy sources and demands. So for example, we could use renewables. So if you had wind turbines that weren't generating electricity, you could switch them to generate heat and store that in the subsurface. Same with waste heat from data centres, or energy from waste plants, and also sewage treatment works are a source of heat. So we're looking at whether this can be stored underground, and then we're using the mine workings almost to transmit the heat to other areas. And so then you could have a development of homes drawing the water off, and then you could also have something like a horticulture project. So we're quite interested in looking at mine energy for horticulture projects, because it offers an opportunity to increase our food resilience. So just thinking about the mine shafts and the opportunities relating to those. So we have 177,000 known mine entries. and by mine entries they may be adits, so they're kind of horizontal or sub-horizontal tunnels, or shafts. There are more shafts than adits. There's around about 134,000 mine shafts. Some have been filled in, some are open, so we have to look carefully to see what's available in a particular area. But we've got a lot of interest in using these for various different things, so we're looking at them for thermal storage. Also, we've been asked about hydrogen storage, and we've also been asked about the potential of dropping weights down for electricity production. We've got a shaft in Scotland that we're looking at, which has the potential to heat over 1,000 homes for a period of several days. So we're keen to try and get some project running there, where we probably put something like solar hot water into that to boost the temperature of the mine. And we're looking at some research that's been done in Germany to see what the maximum temperature we could take the mine up to. And it looks to be something like 60 degrees is quite doable from a kind of geochemical point of view in terms of how it might change the water. Also, we've been speaking to some people who work quite a lot on heat networks, and because the mine water shafts are very tall and thin, they've got a really good thermodynamic performance because they stratify quite well, so you can put your hot water in at the top and have your cooler water at the bottom, and they don't get too mixed up, which is what you want. The more stratification you get, the better, because you have store higher temperatures at the top of the system. So some of the opportunities that we have, we've got places where we either pump water or it flows under gravity, so that's immediately available. Proven, because we've usually got records about how long they flowed and what temperature they flowed at and the water quality, which may go back a decade or more. The challenge here is where the location is. So are they located to where the heat users may be? So we have some that are, and also there's a potential for any new schemes to consider whether there's any loads nearby. Then you can have kind of single installations. So the benefits of doing that is there's one client and end user, so it's quite simple. It's probably the client that's developing the site, so it's a simple situation. The location can be a bit more variable, subject to the workings. We can have a look for the best site within the boundary. The cons are it can be expensive drilling boreholes, so for a single building it needs to be something maybe like a leisure centre where you've got a high energy demand, so you're getting the maximum kind of benefit from it. And then the kind of most complex in terms of kind of risks and returns are heat networks, because they offer opportunities of scale, but you've obviously got a lot of customers there to deal with. Is it new build? Is it retrofit? There's new business opportunities for people to come in and sell the heat, so maybe a local authority would be interested in selling the heat to the customers. There's other opportunities. You could have horticulture projects running nearby. There could be job creation from that. So the heat networks and associated businesses we see as being quite potentially valuable. Obviously, again, there's upfront capital spend. You've got many clients and you've got a lack of heat regulation and a lack of heat market at the moment. So it's thinking about, are people going to be happy buying heat instead of buying gas and those kind of things. So some of the projects that we go through when we're developing a mine energy project, the initial stage will be looking at feasibility, which involves planning and licensing. So you need permission from ourselves, as we own the workings, to enter the workings by drilling, and also permission from the Environment Agency. That needs to all mesh with the energy supply and demand at the site, and whether it's cost effective to drill in terms of the amount of heat you're going to sell. And once you've done a feasibility, if that proves promising, then you do some kind of pilot drilling of a pilot borehole and test that borehole to see how it performs. And you'd be looking for things like how deep the water is, what temperature it's at, and what kind of flow you can get out of the well. And if that it looks positive, then you go to the next stage where you put your doublet in, connect it to the topside infrastructure and commission it. And then the final stage is obviously where you're delivering heat to the customers. You're claiming the RH high, and also what's useful is gathering data on how the system's performing, because that will feed into new schemes that are being developed as well. So on optimizing projects, there's lots of things you can do to increase the chances of success. So basically, the more heat you can use from your mine energy system, the better. So you want a range of customers and a range of demands. You want some anchor loads that are going to be there all the time and have a known demand. You can also cascade the use. So in this example, you could take the water out, take 5 degrees out to heat homes, take a further 5 degrees out to heat a glass house, and then either reinject the water or discharge it depending on what you're doing. Also, if you can have energy storage in there, then obviously that really increases the kind of economic performance of the scheme. And some of the social drivers as well. So are you addressing fuel poverty? Are you delivering heat to areas that were hard to treat or didn't have gas before? The challenges are the RHI, which for non-domestic projects pays out just over 9p a kilowatt hour for the heat produced. So that obviously is really good for offsetting the capital costs and the running costs when you put in a mine energy system. Interaction between state aids and subsidies, sometimes there's conflicts there. Lack of heat networks at the moment and the markets and regulation that go alongside them. And also trying to replace these really labour intensive industries. So mining obviously employed a lot of people in mining areas. What can we bring to those areas now through developing energy systems? Is there any potential there to develop new jobs and bring in new opportunities as well? Getting end users to think about using heat differently, so they might not have a gas boiler, they might have something else in their home, and they might not buy gas, they might buy electricity, or they might buy energy as a service. And also making sure that projects that are developed go well, because we're at the stage where we've got a few going ahead now, and these will be exemplars, so they need to work really well and be done the best we can. So the mine energy opportunities, there's about 30 projects happening across the world already, and one in the UK at the moment, which is at Lanchester Wines. They produce, I think, just under 4 megawatts of heat. And we've got quite a few going on. This list has actually increased since I put this together because it's going up quite quickly. We've got a lot of opportunities and a lot of interest in this. And we're hoping that some will be breaking ground this year, so there will be some drilling going on towards some of these projects this year. So just a couple of examples of some of our projects. So Seaham Garden Village is one, and we have a pumping system up at the right there. So that's the Dordon Mine Water Treatment System. Dordon Colliery closed in 1991, and we already pump and treat the water there before discharging it to the sea. So the idea here is that we'd intercept the water before it goes through the treatment system just to take the heat out of it, and then the heat from the mine water would then be passed through the heat network that serves the homes. The first phase will have 1,400 homes, half of which will be affordable. And in the homes, we plan to have an energy centre that will circulate water at 60 degrees on an all plastic network. And in the homes, people will have a heat interface unit and normal radiators. So they won't see any difference in what they've got in the home apart from the heat interface unit. But in terms of radiators and how they get their heat, it will be as familiar as possible. So this project's being led by Durham County Council, and Toland are the owner of the site at the moment. And also this one, which has been in the news lately, we're very excited to be working with the guys at Gateshead. So this is a really exciting opportunity to extend their heat network, and we're currently working with them on that scheme as well. So that's really exciting. We'll be putting one of our own boreholes in this area, so we can find out a bit more about how the mine water system's working in this area, to support what the council are doing here as well. There's also another project which I think has been in the news recently as well at Heaven. So the northeast is actually becoming a real hotspot for mine energy, which is fantastic. So hopefully through what I've shown you here that we've turned what has been viewed often as a liability into something which is an asset and could be very important in delivering lots of things to the UK, on the energy side, on the kind of resilience side, and also in terms of the social aspects, public safety, job opportunities, taking people out of fuel poverty. So obviously I'm just presenting one solution here for decarbonising heat. but it is very compatible with the low carbon technologies and both sources of heat and electricity, particularly if we can capitalise on the storage potential in the subsurface as well. Well, thank you very much for listening, and I'll happy to take any questions.
Okay. Well, I will give a quick round of applause. I see Simona's given a wave as well. So very many thanks indeed, Charlotte, for, as always, a riveting talk. And I can see in the couple of months that you've now been in the Coal Authority that the story has been developing even faster. We have a bunch of questions, some of which I can read. I've lost them. Come back, questions. There we go. Where's my questions gone? There we are on the side now. Let me go back to the first one I saw, which was Ian Madley. Would you like to ask the question, or if not, I can do so. Okay, we're picking up a little bit of random noise from somewhere. I will ask Charlotte the question. There are a couple of questions from Ian. The first one, Charlotte, it's understandable that the temperature equilibrates between rock and water, but is the issue not the heat flow, how quickly this heat will be replenished if we start to remove heat from the water? So you touched on it a little bit, but perhaps you could expand on that.
Yeah, so obviously with us looking for kind of long pathways between where we're abstracting from and where we're re-injecting to, then that's what we're trying to optimize the time for the water to heat back up. So we're only looking for it to heat back up by 4 or 5 degrees. It's something that we do need to do research on. I mean, it's been done at Heerlen in the Netherlands, which has been running now for over a decade without degradation in the source temperature. But it's something that we're working with Durham on, actually, on the temperature degradation and whether that is an issue longer term.
Yeah, we're hoping to have a share with one of our colleagues, Jeroen van Hunen, a master's by research working on this very topic starting in October, and some preliminary work was done. Some very good preliminary work was done by a small bunch of undergraduates this year as well. So we'll move on to Tony Roskilly. I'm going to pitch in a bit on this as well, Charlotte, but I'll give it to you first. Providing energy services using mine water needs to be sustainable. How stable are the galleries? Are they likely to collapse and reduce flow in the future?
Well, that's something we obviously we have a good idea of the plans and as the mines were left, but we don't know what's happened to them as they're flooded. So we are quite cautious about, for example, we've been approached people wanting to do things where you'd be putting lots of flows around underground, and obviously we're mindful of the impact that might have on the stability. We know that things like the some of the roadways do stay open because they're very well engineered. What we know less about are the room and pillar workings, which is why when we develop projects, we put test bores into those and we do test pumping at those. And that's why we always try and aim for intersections as well, so that if we do have blockages, we're minimizing the chance of those causing problems.
Yeah, it's worth saying here as well that that is being monitored at the moment. There's a company, TerraMotion, based out of Nottingham University, originally based out of Nottingham University, and they have a PhD student, David G, with the Coal Authority, and he is using INSAR with the baseline technique and getting some very good information. We know, for example, that a number of the coal fields rather are wobbling, going up and down. Nottingham is rising at 5 millimeters a year. And I think one of the points which is really interesting out of Charlotte's work is that, you know, if we monetize these flooded mines, in other words, if they have commercial value rather than simply ensuring their safety, we'll make damn certain we know where the water is moving, and in that way very much improve the post-abandonment management of these mines. So aside from the intrinsic heat value, there is actually a long-term safety value in what's being done here. I've got a question which I'm guessing is Helen Goodman. If it's not Helen Goodman, I do apologise. It's Helen G. A very simple question. How long does it take to get a scheme up and running?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, you're looking at, it does depend, because it's all a little bit site specific, and it depends on the kind of scheme you're doing. For things like the licensing for abstracting and removing water, that's generally a 13-week period, done with the Environment Agency. So there's some time constraints on that, and there's obviously time taken to drill wells, depends on how many wells you're doing, and then testing them. But I would think within a year or two, you would be a long way to having your project going. Bit of a moving feast, because it does depend on the scheme, but yeah.
Yeah, it's not so much the technical hold-ups, is it? It's more perceptual and commercial.
But maybe
Yeah.
if we wanted to scale up, we might ask for those things to be streamlined a bit, to speed up the admin bit.
There's things we're identifying that could definitely be streamed up, like possibly of like things like planning, for example. So is our planning required for we put boreholes in periodically for monitoring in different parts of the coal field, and because that's being done for environmental reasons, that's often done as a permitted development. But for an energy borehole, which is there for a different purpose, we've been asking the questions: will that be the same, or will there have to be planning applications done?
Yeah.
So those kind of things could be streamlined, possibly.
Yeah, great.
The next question from Boardroom, whoever that is, it really follows on. What's the unit cost of sinking each borehole? How many test boreholes do you need to establish a viable scheme?
Well, again, it varies what you're going through, but I mean, some of the drilling costs that we've been given for actually drilling the wells is like something like £1,000 a metre as a rule of thumb, but it varies depending on the diameter of the well, which is linked to the amount of flow you want and the size of pump you've got to get down there. But as a very rough rule of thumb, you could use that to estimate your borehole costs.
It's funny that number comes up time and time again. If you want to put a heat network pipeline in an urban district, it's about the same rate. And if you want to build a pipeline offshore, it's about the same rate, £1 million a kilometre. It's clearly a rule of thumb used by all pipeline engineers and drilling engineers. We should remember that, maybe. Okay, so moving on to, I guess it's Chris Jones. What's the status of work internationally on this, and are there any different characteristics between locations that would make some countries more viable or less viable than others?
Well, yeah, I mean, they've all got different characteristics. Some, I mean, we're quite lucky in this country, but I know, for example, some of the sites in Germany, some of the coal mines there are quite deep, so obviously the drilling costs are quite higher there. There's 30 projects going on globally. The longest running one is one in Canada in Spring Hill at I think it's some kind of packaging plant, and the next longest running one is Healing, that's been running on a decade scale. They've all been running successfully over that time, so there's quite a lot of projects there going. Just each one is very different, which makes it difficult to generalize, but it does show you that it's quite versatile as an energy source.
Okay, thanks. The next question, I'm going to dive in before you. Well, it's a statement rather than a question from Ian Madley. There was a suggestion from Nottingham University a few months ago that the gas network pipes might be repurposed to provide water for heat exchangers. Is this worth exploring? Well, funnily enough, Ian, I have been exploring that with a company in the west of the UK, in the Manchester area, which is actively replacing gas pipelines, not so much of using the old ones, but can we stick in a second pipe for water as well, whilst you replace the old pipelines, which are quite leaky, for the new is it polyurethane? Anything to add on that, Charlotte?
Yeah, I suppose it'd just be, if we were going to repurpose that network, there would be competition against if it's being repurposed for hydrogen. So, and it would again depend on the size. So, whether the size is enough to flow sufficient water through. So again, it would depend on.
Puts me in mind of the Carlsberg adverts a few years ago, where the man was digging a hole in the ground, and the telephone engineer, the electrician, the gas men all decided to put their pipes in there. It was only when the undertaker turned up that they chose not to share the hole with him. So back to Boardroom, and Boardroom says the RHI is closing to new schemes on the 31st of March 2021. Does BEIS think there will be long-term support for this if the RHI is not extended or replaced by then? Are you able to comment on that?
Well, obviously we're not BEIS, so I can't comment, but there is the opportunity to consult on this and provide feedback to BEIS, which we are actually finding out if we're able to do that. But obviously anybody that is working in this sector, then they should definitely make their comments known and feed them back to them, because obviously it's important that there is something ongoing there to support these systems at the stage they're at now. They still need it.
This could be a yes or no, Charlotte, from James. Is there, well, it should be, are there opportunities for heat network contractors?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say, I mean, a lot of the projects we're being involved with are, because we just deal with the subsurface stuff, but a lot of the projects are being done by local authorities. So anybody who's working in that sector, just make sure you're on their relevant tendering portals and you can see what opportunities will be coming up, I guess.
Clearly, I'm working down the questions, and we've still got 5 or 6 minutes to go. Stefan Nielsen asks, how important is the permeability of the rocks surrounding the tunnels in the heat recharge of the mine?
Well, we don't have a lot of information on that, but that's something that I think something like the UK GEOS site in Glasgow, which has been developed for testing the mine energy demonstration site, they have drilled several boreholes into lots of different types of mining terrain. So I think once they test pump those, that would be quite interesting to give us some information on that. We've got a bit of information from some of the places where we pumped already. But yeah, it's not been done.
James Greaves asks, and I'm going to expand his question, I hope he doesn't mind, ask the question, are there methane emission problems and opportunities? And to that, I think we should add, what are the emissions of not just greenhouse gases, but other material, other solutes like iron, other things we need to worry about, or just methane and iron?
I think for the methane, in areas where you've got the water levels that have recovered, then there's a lesser risk of methane, because the sites at where the methane will be produced are effectively cut off by the water being there. That's not to say it isn't there, and we do mine gas risk assessments for any projects where we're drilling into workings. Obviously on the, I assume it's kind of water quality stuff, we'll be putting the water back underground. But it's also regulated by the Environment Agency. So, care is taken not to put water back where it shouldn't be going, not to mix waters of very different quality, that kind of thing. So we're aware of that, and there are measures in place.
And Byron E. Holroyd from the National Energy Action asks, you mentioned new build estates. Is there an opportunity to insulate and retrofit existing home in former mining areas and make them suitable for heat pump use?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're not that involved in topside stuff, but very much linked up with the stuff that you guys at Durham have been doing with Adrian Cantle-Jones at Durham, the work he's been doing on external cladding of mining terraces, and we are very interested in looking at. A lot of this will have to be done and delivered through retrofit. We're not going to deliver it all with new build if we want to decarbonise heat. So there's loads of opportunities there, and I think given
I would suggest, Byron, you drop us a note. There's a lot of work's been going on, led by Hong in engineering and Jackie Bell, who's on the call. And we move on now to Andy Emery, and I'm going to answer this. Well, you can have a go, Charlotte, but it's my baby really as much as anything else. Tony Roskilly's question is also interesting to me. Have there been any studies that looking at recorded seismicity and frequency of mine collapse during recorded? Yes, Andy. There is a comprehensive, enormous paper written by me and colleagues on induced seismicity, which I can give you a link to. Or if you want to do the shortcut, log into human-induced seismicity, do a search on human-induced seismicity on the internet, and you will find the website which lists about 1,000 examples of human-induced seismicity, includes mining, water abstraction, oil and gas processes, the odd nuclear explosion, and so on. So yes, there are indeed. There's a delightful comment though that one of my rather what's the word? I'm trying to think of the appropriate word for my colleague Fred Worrell, who delights in pointing out that the biggest impact on seismicity in the UK has been Margaret Thatcher by closing the mines, and it's quite true. Once the mines were operating, they were a huge source of generally small-scale seismicity in the coal mining areas, and they still represent the most seismically active bits of the UK, alongside the Great Glen Fault in Scotland. Charlotte, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I'm happy for you to for people to view your paper and yeah.
Promotion
authority.
Again, Andy, drop us a line, and I can give you some links to that. It's just amazing how the earth moves for us, as it were. So on to James Grieve. Will the Coal Authority continue to own the workings and retain the environmental liabilities?
At the moment, yes, we own the workings. We don't own the water in them or the heat in the water, but we own the infrastructure.
Okay. We're fast running out of time. Questions keep coming in. Imogen, how is the local community responding to these schemes generally? Do people perceive particular risks?
So from work I was doing when I was at Durham, people were generally quite positive. I think it depends if there's still people that lived and worked in the mines or had family members that did still present in the area. And I think there has been, I haven't had personal experience of this, but I have heard that in areas where there's more second-home ownership, there people are a bit more wary of it than places where, as I say, people have still got family members living locally and are very keen to see the effort that went into making the mines being reused for, you know, low carbon energy in future.
A very pertinent question from Nathaniel Forbes Skip, who was a student with us in Durham a few years ago. With the Seaham project, you're going to have houses with radiators. Why not have underfloor heating? It would be far more efficient, wouldn't it?
It comes down, yeah, I mean, that's not our choice. And obviously that's not even decided at this stage because that work would all be, you know, offered out to tender. We've been involved with the subsurface stuff on this. But it would be down to what the developers will be prepared to put in. So can you get a developer to put in underfloor heating rather than a radiator?
Indeed. Mark Davidson, I think we've covered Mark's question, and that's retrofitting to colliery houses and so on. Mark, by all means, get in touch with us and we can let you know what's going on. Similarly with Lena Dominelli asks about says it's a very interesting initiative and asks about the environmental consequences, some of which we've touched on in here. I'm just looking for any different questions just to finish off. We are a wee bit short of, oh my goodness. Right, last question. It's to me privately, but I'm going to read it out anyway because it's a great way to finish off. The questions will go to Charlotte, and so if we didn't get through to your question now, we will do so. But Doug Allen, excuse me, this is to me alone, but I'm going to read it out. If the government gave you a £10 billion grant, what would you do with it?
Go and drill some wells, of course.
drill an awful lot of wells for that.
Drill an awful lot of wells next to places where we know people want heat. So yeah.
Doug, I'll give you my shopping list as well later on. Okay, so wonderful. We peaked, I think, at 82 or 83 people. Lynn might improve that upwards a slight bit. We will get those questions answered. This has been the most people we've had on the call in these last few weeks. Please come back next week and listen to Duncan. Meantime, a huge thank you to Charlotte, and I wish for every success, and the Coal Authority every success with delivering this. It has the opportunity of changing the world, if our little bit of the world at least. Thanks, Charlotte, and
Thanks, everyone.
catch you all soon.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
A quick question about access to the recording for other people. Perhaps you could just point people to.
Oh, yes, we will. This has been recorded. Thanks very much, Simone. And you'll be able to link to it on the DI website. Okay, doke. Thank you and goodbye.